Today we're going to integrate information from Modules 4 and Module 6 to help you learn how to become skeptical consumers, to introduce you into the world of nothing is as it seems. By the time we finish this particular screen lecture and when we're done discussing this in class, ask questions about the supplement that your neighbor is taking, the protein powder that's being eaten at the gym, or the latest diet that everyone is trying that guarantees you to lose 20 pounds before you get up the next morning. This is what we're going to talk about today. We'll see if it works. The field of nutrition is based on scientific study that integrates biology, physiology, microbiology. Look at all this science that you guys are getting. But in order to understand how the evidence is produced, we're looking at evidence-based science, evidence-based claims. You need to understand the basics of scientific inquiry. And this starts with the scientific method. I know if you pause for a moment and think back, somewhere in the gray matter, you learned the scientific method. Was it 7th grade? Was it 3rd grade? Was it last week? We're going to review it briefly and talk about how really it's integrated into a lot of the claims that are made in the field of science and not necessarily made in the field of fraud. We'll talk more about that. So the scientific method is hypothesis driven. It follows a basic format. You may remember, you ask a question, you form a hypothesis, design that experiment. What you need to remember or realize is that you never stop asking questions. The findings in these studies usually lead to more questions and more hypotheses and more ways of looking at a claim. There are different study types or research designs. There's the case study, which results from a single person protocol conducted by a medical doctor. A single patient may have reported something that occurred, say, from vitamin A or a medication that they were taking, and the doctor reports on this particular case. It may become the basis for a clinical research trial, for incorporating more people, a group of people, to see if the same result can occur. We have epidemiological and interventional designs. These are population-based. They're looking at large groups of people. So you want to have a large number of subjects. You want the study to take place over a long enough period of time so that the conclusions can be significant. Was it a 24-hour study? Was it a 3-week study? Was it a 6-week study? Was it a 12-month study? The longer the duration, the more significant the results will be. But there are drawbacks. People drop out. Matching groups. You want to make sure that the folks you're looking at are similar in ethnicity or gender, age, lifestyle, disease. These are all different things you might look at. If you want to look at the effect of calcium and vitamin D on osteoporosis, chances are you want to look at women and you want to look at osteoporosis. You don't want to be looking at teenage boys and acne. You want to have a control group. So you have an experimental and you have a placebo. The placebo is extremely important because it provides a basis for comparison. You want your results to be reproducible. It doesn't matter what your results are. If nobody else under the same conditions can get the same results, then the results are insignificant. We'll talk a little bit more about the treatment protocol, whether it's what's called single blind, double blind, and whether it's a crossover study. And I put in, you want your research to be published. This isn't really part of the design, but you want to be able to publish your results, your study, in a peer-reviewed journal. In nutrition, people can publish their studies in nutrition reviews, in the Journal of Clinical Nutrition, in the American Dietetic Association journal. What it means is that a group of your peers, people who study the same thing that you do, who've worked in the same field as you, are able to look at your research and to critically evaluate it based on similar background, similar research. The treatment protocols, what are they? We have what's called a single blind design. In this particular type of design, The subjects don't know whether they are getting the experimental or the control. In other words, you don't know whether you're getting vitamin C or a sugar pill, but I do. So it's single blind with respect to the subject, but not with respect to the researcher. We'll talk about some of the drawbacks of these. In a double-blind study, again, you have placebo or control, and you have an experimental group. But in this particular design, neither the subject nor the investigator know who is in which group. This is a very good design because it reduces the possibility of there being any bias on the part of the investigator. A crossover study, which is very expensive and difficult to do in human research trials, is the type of study where each group experiences a period of time in being in both the experimental and the control group. So in other words, you may be on the sugar pill for a certain period of time, and then you will cross over and be on in the experimental group for a while. But neither you nor the investigator know. This would be called a double-blind crossover study. Here's an example in nutrition research of a double-blind study. You have your experimental group, where the variable being tested is present. Over here you have your control group, where the variable being tested is absent. So these folks would be getting the placebo. You want to have a large group. You want to collect your data over a long period of time. You compile your results, you analyze them, and then you draw a conclusion. Let's look at one particular study. It was done with Olestra, a fat blocker. The hypothesis for this was that Olestra causes intestinal cramps. This study was first done back in 1993. Wow potato chips. I don't imagine a number of you might remember them in this particular incarnation, but Wow potato chips contain the fat blocker Olestra, meaning that you didn't absorb all the fat in the chips. So that which does not get digested and absorbed gets excreted. And there were intestinal cramps, let's say, was the least of the concerns that the company had. They did a controlled experiment. They had the variable being the Wow potato chips given to the experimental group, and they had a control group getting chips that supposedly tasted exactly like the Wow chips, but did not contain the Olestra. If we go through the scientific method, the hypothesis, Olestra causes intestinal cramps. A prediction, people who eat potato chips made with Olestra will be more likely to get intestinal cramps than those who eat chips without Olestra. You had an experimental group and you had a control group. There were 1,561 people in the control group. 37% got cramps. You had 619 out of the 1,620 people in the experimental group. 38% got cramps. And the conclusion was that these results were about equal. The conclusion was that people who eat chips made with Olestra are just about as likely to get intestinal cramps as those who eat chips made without Olestra. So these particular results did not support the hypothesis. And in 2003, Olestra reformulated and came up with what is now known as Lay's light potato chips. These potato chips, they may even be in the machines here. These contain Olestra, and in the serving size recommended, supposedly do not cause any significant amount of gastrointestinal distress. Critical thinking in science and beyond. I want you folks to learn to ask questions, to become critical thinkers. This is when you look at information objectively. You don't have an agenda when you're looking at a claim. You need to consider the source. Where's the information coming from? Let credible scientific evidence, not opinions, not hearsay, not what your roommate said, not what everybody at the gym says, but let the evidence do the convincing. Question the credentials and motives of the people doing the study. Find out who disagrees with them and why. Evaluate the content. Learn to separate fact from opinion. Everyone is entitled to their opinion, but there is only one set of facts upon which those diverse opinions can be made. Be able to distinguish between cause and correlation. This is something we can talk more about in class. Remember, testimonials are not based on research. Just because I said it works doesn't mean it's true. It may work for me, but I can't tell you it's going to work for everybody else. Another way of saying that is that the plural of anecdote being somebody's story, is not evidence. Stephen Bosell, author of Snake Oil Science, offers a simple 4-item checklist, things that you want to look at when you want to decide whether or not a study is likely to be credible. Is it a randomized study with a credible control group? Are there at least 50 people in the control group and the experimental group? Was the dropout rate less than 25%? Were they able to reproduce the results in a high-quality, prestigious peer-reviewed journal? If you can answer yes to each of these items, then there is a high probability that the claim is truth. For class, what I'm going to do is divide you into small groups, and I'm going to hand out some literature, and I want you to review the literature with some of the tools that were discussed today. You are going to be the peer reviewers. What do you think? Thanks, folks.